Hey YouTube, my name is Nikolai, and today we're going to be doing a classic drawing atelier in Photoshop. So for this, I'm going to be working on a Medici bust for my cast drawing, and cast drawings are a staple of drawing workshops because they allow you to focus on form and rendering without really getting caught up in things like texture or color. I recently read Juliet Estride's classical drawing atelier, which prompted this study. I'll leave an affiliate link down in the description if you want to pick it up. It's a great resource if you want to learn some tried and true methods to increase your drawing ability. Now, because we are working in Photoshop instead of a traditional graphite or charcoal, we will have to modify the process a bit. So in this video we'll talk about sketching, color blocking, go over some rendering, and also discuss some tools in the adjustment layers that we can make to have better control of our values. And throughout the video, I'll share the resources that I used, and hopefully you'll find beneficial on your own art journey. Now, as a typical disclaimer, this is not the end-all be-all how to render, no one can do it any other way kind of video, but hopefully you can learn some things throughout it and adapt it into your own process. Now, in order to get the most out of this study, I did set myself some parameters. So for this, I won't be color picking from my reference image. I'll be relying on the value scale that you see me build here. Now, to build this value scale, I started with a black, and I fanned it out using a brush with a low flow setting, and then alt-clicked or color picked in between those values to continue to smooth them out. I also wanted to avoid using the airbrush in this study, so I'll be using Espinlash's line decker set, which I'll link in the description. After throwing some values in the background, I'll begin my sketching process. I like to start by identifying my larger shapes and primarily using straight, blocky lines to describe the form. This will help to ensure that my proportions are as close as possible, and I won't get distracted by focusing on the minute details too soon. Once I have my overall shapes established, I'll start by defining the features of the face. Now, we're not going to go into this too in-depth in this video, but I do plan on making a kind of portrait facial breakdown video in the future, so make sure to subscribe if you'd like to see that. If you need some help with your portraiture in the interim, I definitely suggest checking out Oliver Sin's Drawing the Head for Artists. It's a beautiful book and he does stunning work, and I'll leave an affiliate link in the description. Now, because I'm building this portrait in Photoshop, I can actually create an additional layer and further refine my line art. This will help me to establish the form and shape of all of my features and the face itself, and will save me from having to clean up a million layers. Now, if we were working in traditional media, if we wanted to correct anything, we would need to erase and start over. But since we're working digitally, it's very easy to just kind of warp and skew your layers if you just need to tweak something just a bit. Now, once I'm fairly happy with my sketch, I'll go in and establish the two-value read of my bust. So I'm going to focus on areas of light and shadow. That way I know where that core shadow is and where those transitions are. If value is still tricky for you, I definitely suggest doing a sphere study, where you just try to render the roundness of a form and the cast shadow on a surface. While it might not be the most interesting thing to do, it is kind of the first step in learning value. Now, once I'm happy with my liner, I'll go in and establish a clipping layer. So this is going to be a layer that I go in and fill the entire bust with, and I'm going to create clipping masks so that I don't lose the shape. Because I'm going to be using an oversized brush for a lot of areas, this will save me from having to go back in with the eraser and clean things up. Next, I'll go in and establish my shadow shapes, just using a darker gray. These are going to be the two areas of my bust. So we have everything that the light hits and everything that's in shadow. And this is really going to define the three-dimensional form of my bust, even if these values are a little dark right now. Once I've got my light areas and my dark areas established, I go in with a darker gray and start to establish some of my core shadow. The core shadow is going to be on that transition line between the light and the dark areas, but I'm also going to be filling in areas of ocular occlusion. Now, it's a little bit of light physics, but what ocular occlusion is, it's the area between two forms that the light can't touch, because light is a physical phenomenon. It bounces around, it hits things, and anywhere that it can't get in is going to be darker. I'm also going to do the same thing with my lighter areas, which are going to kind of push out and attribute areas that are getting hit by that light the most. So this is like the reversed floccular occlusion. With my light and my dark areas generally established, I'm going to start blending between the two values. So just like I said before, I'm not going to be using any smudge tool or airbrush for this. I'm setting my flow on my brush to be very, very low and using a very light hand and color picking to blend those values. This will take us from less of a cell shaded approach and more of that smooth marble tone that we're trying to achieve. And because I've already done the work of establishing the core shadow in my line art, I can turn the line art off and on again in order to get a better understanding of where that transition needs to be. Now at this point, it's pretty clear that my bust is just too dark and that my medium value that I started with was so much on the dark side that it's affecting my other values. So I'm going to go in with a large brush that has a little bit of texture and just brush in a bit more light. I'm being very intentional where I brush in these new values because I don't want them to be so thick that they ruin all that nice form that we've attributed in the work that we've already done, but I still need to adjust them. So I'm going to do this by creating another layer and setting it to linear light, and this is really going to bring our values much closer to that of our reference photo. Another reason to use a larger textured brush is that it can help to add a lot of variance into your piece. Digital art specifically has difficulties with texture because you're really creating texture from scratch. Unlike in traditional media where you have the texture of the paper and the grit of the materials, you have to be conscious of all of that when working in a digital space because there is no inherent texture. Now I'm toggling my line art on and off so that I can see where those core shadows and transitions are, but we're getting much closer to the reference and much closer to where we were when my values were just a little bit too dark. So from here, I can start to really focus in on the minute details and the shadows and in how the light wraps around the form, and we can start to get a lot more believability. Now, as I'm working on this bust drawing, I'm really pulling from a large wealth of anatomy that I've already studied, and it's something I would really suggest of anyone that's trying to depict people, or really anything. If you're trying to draw animals, you still need to know like their base anatomy, because for instance in that cheek, I know that there's a muscle band that goes from the nose down to the outer side of the mouth, and that there's a kind of muzzle of muscle that wraps around the teeth of the mouth that gives us a more three-dimensional form. Because I have that knowledge base, I know where my transition needs to be, even though I'm working from a photo. Because while photos are great, they do flatten out a lot, so I'm pushing my darker values and my lighter values a little bit more so that it can be seen as a bit more realistic. It's never going to be as perfect as the marble sculpture itself or as perfect as the photo, but that's really not the point. I'm trying to hit realism that's a little bit surreal in some ways. Now at this point, I'm about ready to start stepping away from my line art as a whole. I've got some good value and some good form established, and now it's just smoothing out those transitions, especially underneath the neck. And I'm going about doing that by using a very light pressure with an oversized brush and kind of brushing in those values with a light hand so that we don't get that kind of streaky, hard cell kind of shading. There's nothing wrong with that, but because the study is about value and being able to control value, I want to make those transitions as smooth and buttery as possible. Now I'm starting to lose some of my edges around my bust because the background color is the same as the edge color of that clipping layer that I'm using. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to add a bit more value variance in my background, as well as add the cast shadow for the bust on the back surface. And while I'm doing this with that brush and using the Gaussian blur layer to kind of smooth things out, I'm also going back in and adding noise to it. Now noise is just kind of like pixelation and like that VCR kind of effect. I'm not really adding value, but I need to add something that doesn't look so airbrushed. There needs to be some kind of textural element to that background, otherwise it's going to break our illusion of realism. Now at this point, I'm pretty happy with the face and how that's turned out, so I'm going to start to transition into rendering the curls of our Medici bust. Now this was by far the most difficult aspect of this study, just because those curls have so much going on. They have, cast shadows of their own and turning corners, and where the curls butt up against each other are darker, and there's light curls and there's shadow areas. So I definitely think the hair is what I spent the most time on when working on rendering for this. And one trick that I found to help me kind of better understand the values that I was placing was paying attention to the B slider on the color wheel. This is going to be a scale slider from 0 to 100, and it's going to tell you what the relative value is that you're working in. Now, what's tricky about this is value is referential to the values that are surrounded by it. So a 23 next to an 80 versus a 23 next to a 7 is going to look completely different, and it's just kind of how our eyes work and how we perceive value as people. So that was great to see and kind of watch that number, because it allowed me to better understand what my relative value was, and to make sure I wasn't pulling too dark of values into my light areas and too light of value into my darker areas. Now at this stage, we're getting close to completion. My values are pretty spot on, but we can tweak them to make them a little bit closer to our reference photo. So the first thing I did is I needed to up the values in my lighter areas. So I ended up brushing in a lighter value and then setting that layer mode to soft light. And this is going to allow me to kind of pull up those values without destroying the form and structure that we have established. The next tool that I primarily used was a levels layer. Now what levels does is it allows you to kind of redistribute your values and change the transition points. Now it's very, very easy to blow out your layers when it comes to using that tool. So it's not something that I would suggest you go crazy with. It needs to just be subtle tweaks. And you can even see here that I'm lowering the opacity down on that layer because I just don't want to blow everything out. But yeah, overall I'm really happy with how this cast drawing came out. Did a little breakdown of like how long each bit of the process did. If you're looking to kind of up your own skill set and value, definitely check out that classical drawing atelier by Juliet Artistrides that I'll have linked in the description. She does a great job breaking down like the old masters' studies and what they would do. And if you need more help with like instruction work, like Oliver Sin's book is a very solid starting point. If you want to get a better idea of this entire process in a more holistic approach, I'm going to be uploading a hour-long no audio version that's the entire process but sped up. I love throwing one of those on like the background when I'm doing something mind-numbing, so if that's something you're interested, definitely check it out. And if there's any videos you'd like to see or subject matter that you'd like me to tackle in the future, leave that in the comment. I'm looking to kind of dedicate a bit more time to YouTube, and I would love to make stuff that people want to watch. So yeah, thanks for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope that you learned something as you kind of watch me go through this process. And if you found it beneficial, throw me a like, and if you want to see any other content that I make sure to subscribe. Thanks. Bye.